There's a moment that shows up in almost every relationship with someone avoidant, a moment where the whole dynamic quietly flips on its head. It's not the moment they pull back from you. It's not the moment you find yourself chasing after them again. It's not even the moment they end things or go quiet on you for days at a time. The real turning point, the one that truly changes everything, arrives the moment you genuinely stop caring. And by genuinely, I don't mean pretending to be indifferent. I don't mean using silence as a strategy, following relationship advice from the internet, or trying reverse psychology in the hope that they'll suddenly chase you. I don't mean acting detached while secretly checking your phone every few minutes, wondering if they've finally reached out. None of that is real freedom. It is still emotional dependence wearing a different mask. The transformation begins when something deep inside you quietly shifts. It happens when your happiness no longer depends on another person's attention, validation, or approval. It happens when you stop measuring your worth by whether they choose you, text you, miss you, or come back. For the first time, your emotional center moves away from them and returns to where it always belonged, with you. This shift is rarely dramatic. It usually doesn't happen overnight. It grows slowly after countless nights of disappointment, unanswered questions, broken expectations, and exhausting emotional battles. One day, you simply realize that you're tired of carrying the weight of someone else's choices. You're tired of waiting for clarity that never comes, tired of chasing explanations that only create more confusion, and tired of investing your peace into someone who cannot offer the same commitment in return. Then something remarkable happens. You wake up and their absence no longer controls your emotions. Their silence no longer feels like a punishment. Their mixed signals lose their power. You stop replaying old conversations in your mind, searching for hidden meanings. You stop imagining different outcomes or wondering what you could have done differently. The constant emotional noise fades, replaced by an unexpected sense of calm. Ironically, this is often the exact moment when people who once pulled away begin to notice your absence. Not because you've mastered some manipulation technique, but because your energy has genuinely changed. You're no longer reaching for them emotionally. The invisible pressure they once felt is gone. Whether they return or not becomes far less important because your life is no longer standing still, waiting for their decision. This is the freedom that so many people misunderstand. It isn't about becoming cold, bitter, or incapable of love. It isn't about proving a point or winning a psychological game. It's about reclaiming the emotional space you unknowingly handed over to someone else. It's about remembering that your peace is too valuable to be held hostage by another person's uncertainty. When that inner shift finally happens, you stop asking, "How can I make them care?" and begin asking, "How can I care for myself?" That single change in perspective alters everything. You invest your energy into your own growth, your health, your purpose, your relationships, and your future. Instead of waiting for someone to choose you, you choose yourself every single day. And that is the real turning point, not when they come back, not when they apologize, and not when they finally understand your value. The real turning point is when you no longer need any of those things to feel whole. Because the moment you stop needing someone else's permission to be happy is the moment you become truly free. You've stopped over-explaining yourself. You've stopped sitting around waiting for them to come around. You've stopped handing over your emotional energy like it's theirs to keep. And that's exactly when everything changes, because for the first time, the avoidant person realizes the control they'd been quietly relying on this whole time has simply vanished. And that realization lands on them in ways they never saw coming. If you've ever been involved with someone who leans dismissive or fearful avoidant, you already know this dance by heart. They hold back just enough. They ration out affection like it's a limited resource. They pull away just far enough to keep things permanently unbalanced between you two. And what do you usually do in response to that? You chase, you over-explain, you defend your own feelings. You fight tooth and nail for closeness, hoping that if you just show your love clearly enough, they'll finally meet you somewhere in the middle. This push and pull can drag on for months, sometimes for years. It becomes this cycle where they hold all the leverage because deep down they know you care too much to actually walk away. But the second you stop playing your part in that cycle, the entire thing starts to unravel. It's worth pointing out that this cycle rarely feels like a cycle while you're inside it. In the moment, every instance of pulling away and coming back feels unique, like maybe this time will be different, like maybe the last conversation finally got through to them. That's part of what makes it so hard to break. Hindsight makes the pattern obvious, but living through it in real time, each small crumb of affection they toss your way can feel like genuine progress, even when it's really just enough to keep you invested, without ever tipping the relationship into something balanced. Recognizing that pattern for what it actually is, rather than what it feels like in the moment, is usually the first real crack in the cycle. For someone avoidant, control was never just a preference. It was a survival strategy. Somewhere along the way, they learned to associate closeness with danger, with feeling suffocated, or with the threat of being rejected outright. So distance became their comfort zone, their safe harbor. By keeping you at arm's length, they told themselves they were simply protecting their independence, their sense of self. And when you cared more than they did, when you overcompensated to fill the gap they left, it actually reassured them in a strange way. It confirmed they could pull back and you'd still be right there waiting. It confirmed that if they gave less, you'd just give more to make up the difference. Your energy was quietly feeding their illusion of safety and control the entire time. But the moment your silence replaces your explanations, the moment your calm replaces your pleading, the moment your indifference replaces your anxiety, that illusion collapses instantly. And suddenly, they don't feel safe anymore at all. This shift feels like a genuine crack forming in the mask they've spent years carefully building. Avoidants expect a certain script to play out: conflict, chasing, some kind of emotional outburst they can manage or deflect. But your calm detachment doesn't follow that script at all, and that throws them completely off balance. At first, it just confuses them. Why aren't they reacting the way they used to? Why aren't they upset anymore? What actually changed here? Avoidants tend to be surprisingly attuned to whether or not they still matter to you, even if they never say so out loud. When they sense your care has genuinely disappeared, not faked, not performed, but truly gone, it shocks something in them. And that shock, more often than not, sparks a strange kind of curiosity they can't quite shake off. Most avoidants don't come rushing back with open vulnerability the moment they notice this shift. That's simply not how they're wired to operate. Instead, they start testing the waters carefully. You might get a random "hey" text out of nowhere, no real context behind it, a casual comment left on something you posted, a sudden mention of an old memory, just to see how you'll react to it. Even small, seemingly pointless provocations designed purely to get some kind of reaction out of you. None of these are grand romantic gestures, not even close. They're feelers, quiet little tests to check whether they still hold any emotional weight in your life. And when you don't take the bait, when you stay grounded and completely unmoved by any of it, that's exactly when the reality of the situation really starts sinking in for them. Avoidants spend years, sometimes their entire lives, avoiding real vulnerability. They push it down, bury it under layers of independence, convince themselves over and over that they simply don't need anyone else. But when your detachment forces them to actually confront the fact that you're truly slipping away for good, emotions start surfacing that they never expected to feel in the first place. Regret creeps in, a sense of abandonment, a real tangible sense of loss they can't quite explain away. They probably won't express any of this openly. Avoidants rarely do that kind of thing. Instead, it tends to leak out sideways, in indirect little ways. They might suddenly get nostalgic, bringing up good memories out of nowhere. They might start complimenting you on things they never once acknowledged before. They might even attempt subtle little ways to reconnect with you. And it's not purely about wanting you back either. It's about the shock of losing the one person who quietly anchored them, even while they kept that same person at arm's length the entire time. There's a particular kind of quiet that follows an avoidant around once this realization sets in, one that has nothing to do with peace. It's the quiet of someone who suddenly has more room in their head than they know what to do with. Room that used to be filled with the reassurance of knowing you were still there, still hoping, still holding a space open for them, no matter how little they gave back. Losing that reassurance doesn't just create sadness, it creates a kind of disorientation. The habits built around your presence, checking in occasionally, knowing they could return to a warm welcome whenever they felt like it, no longer function the way they used to. And people, avoidant or not, don't handle the sudden absence of a familiar structure very gracefully, even when that structure wasn't particularly healthy for either person involved. Here's the part most avoidants would never admit out loud. They actually do crave love and real connection, just like anyone else does. They simply never learned how to hold on to it without feeling completely overwhelmed by it. So when they see you genuinely thriving without them around, when they notice your energy has shifted somewhere else entirely, when they see your peace returning and your happiness no longer tethered to whether they're present in your life or not, it unsettles them in a way words alone never could. Your freedom speaks louder than anything you could ever say to them directly. They no longer see someone sitting around waiting on the sidelines. They see someone who's genuinely free. And that freedom in you tends to stir up real fear in them, because somewhere deep down, they realize they seriously underestimated your strength this whole time. And that realization directly challenges the comfortable belief they've always clung to, that they could keep love permanently at arm's length without ever really losing it. It's worth digging a little deeper into why your freedom specifically hits an avoidant so hard, because on the surface it seems almost backwards. You'd think someone who claims to want space and independence would be relieved to see you building a full life without them, but that's not usually what happens. Watching you thrive without their involvement quietly dismantles a story they've been telling themselves for a long time. The story that you needed them more than they needed you, that your happiness was somehow tied to their presence or their approval. When that story stops being true right in front of them, it forces an uncomfortable question to the surface, one they've spent years avoiding. If you're not falling apart without them, what exactly was all that distance protecting them from in the first place? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, so most avoidants would rather not sit with it for long. But the seed gets planted regardless, whether they act on it or not. Not every avoidant reacts to this shift in exactly the same way. Some double down hard on their defenses. They pretend they don't care either, putting on a convincing show of indifference. They tell themselves they're perfectly fine, that they never really needed you to begin with. But even buried underneath all that denial, the thought keeps quietly lingering in the back of their mind. They replay old moments over and over in their head. They check up on what you're doing, even if they'd never admit it. They might even start dating someone new fairly quickly, not necessarily because they've truly moved on, but because distraction feels a whole lot easier than sitting with the emptiness you left behind in their life. Others take a completely different path. For them, this moment becomes something closer to a genuine wake-up call. They start to realize they can't keep hiding from real intimacy forever. And while they might still stumble awkwardly through vulnerability, not quite knowing how to handle it gracefully, you might start noticing a softness in them, an openness that was never really there before this happened. Either way, no matter which direction they go, the entire dynamic between you two has permanently changed. The control they once held over the relationship simply isn't there anymore. This is usually the part where people ask whether any of this actually changes the avoidant person for good, whether the shock is enough to permanently rewire how they show up in relationships going forward. Honestly, that answer varies a lot from person to person, and it's probably not the most useful question to be asking anyway. Some avoidants do use this kind of wake-up call as a genuine turning point, especially if it happens to line up with other pressures in their life that are already pushing them toward growth, therapy, a hard conversation with themselves, a pattern they're tired of repeating with other people too. Others simply file the experience away as one more data point confirming that closeness eventually leads to loss, and they retreat even further into whatever defenses got them through it. You don't get to control which version happens, and trying to predict or manage their growth from the outside usually just pulls you right back into the exact dynamic you worked so hard to leave behind. And here's where the real transformation actually takes place, not in them, but in you. Because back when you were chasing after them, you were essentially giving your own power away piece by piece. You were handing your energy over to someone else, hoping against hope they'd eventually return it to you in kind. But the moment you detached, truly detached, you took that power right back into your own hands. And that shift, your shift specifically, is the one thing an avoidant feels more deeply than almost anything else you could ever say or do. But here's a harder truth that a lot of people genuinely struggle to accept. Not every avoidant comes back because of love. Sometimes they come back just to test whether they still hold any power over you. Sometimes it's really about their own ego seeking reassurance or proving to themselves that they're still desired somewhere out there. And yes, sometimes, occasionally, it actually is real. Sometimes losing your care cuts deep enough that they're finally forced to face themselves honestly and choose to genuinely do the inner work required. But here's the real difference this time around. You're no longer sitting around waiting to see which outcome plays out. That right there is the actual freedom in all of this. When an avoidant finally realizes you genuinely don't care anymore, it's like holding up a mirror directly to their deepest fear. They're forced to see the real cost of all that distance they created. They finally feel the emptiness that their own walls built up around them over time. And for once in their life, they can't escape from that feeling, no matter how hard they try. For them, this whole thing feels deeply unsettling. For you, though, it's genuine liberation. Because your healing was never actually dependent on whether or not they eventually come back to you. Your healing begins the exact moment you stop chasing after love in a place that never felt safe to begin with, and start choosing love in a place that actually feels mutual instead. That's the real turning point in all of this. Not the moment they finally realize you don't care, but the moment you realize you never needed to care in that anxious, desperate way to begin with. When their silence stops feeling like a personal rejection and starts feeling more like an open invitation to build something genuinely better for yourself instead. That's the exact moment your power fully returns to you. So remember this going forward. Your value was never defined by who decides to stay or who decides to leave. It's defined entirely by the peace you're able to create for yourself the moment you finally choose you. That's the real shift here, the one that quietly changes absolutely everything about how you move through relationships going forward. So when an avoidant finally realizes you don't care anymore, it genuinely shakes them to their core. It exposes their fears, their hidden dependence on you, their buried longing for real connection they never let themselves admit to. But for you, it becomes the moment of true liberation. The exact moment you stop tying your own self-worth to someone else's unpredictable behavior. Because the power was truly never in their distance from you. It was always sitting quietly in your own choice, your choice to stop chasing, to reclaim your own energy, and to remember your value all on your own terms. There's something worth sitting with here, something most people miss the first few times they go through this. The reason this shift feels so seismic to an avoidant isn't really about you specifically, not in the way it might feel. It's about what you represent to their entire internal system. For years, maybe their whole life, they've built an identity around the idea that they can control how close anyone gets to them. That control was the thing keeping them feeling safe, the thing standing between them and whatever old wound taught them that closeness always ends in pain, disappointment, or loss. You, without meaning to, became living proof that their system worked. Every time you chased, every time you softened your boundaries to accommodate their distance, every time you absorbed the discomfort of an uneven relationship just to keep the connection alive, you were unknowingly reinforcing their belief that they could keep people at a safe distance indefinitely and still be loved anyway. That's a heavy thing to carry, and most people carrying it have no idea they're doing it. So when you stop, really stop, not out of spite, not as a manipulation tactic, but because something in you has genuinely healed or hardened or simply run out of patience. You're not just changing your own behavior. You're pulling out one of the load-bearing beams of their entire emotional architecture. That's why the reaction can look so disproportionate sometimes. That's why someone who seemed completely unbothered by your presence for months can suddenly seem unsettled, distracted, even a little lost once your energy is gone. It was never really about missing you in the simple, straightforward way people usually mean when they say that. It was about missing the specific role you played in keeping their defenses intact. It's worth noting too that this shift rarely announces itself with any drama. You won't necessarily feel a dramatic moment where you declare out loud or even to yourself that you're officially done caring. More often it creeps up slowly, almost without your notice. You'll catch yourself not checking your phone as often. You'll realize a message from them used to send your whole day sideways, and now it barely registers. You'll notice you've stopped rehearsing conversations in your head, stopped drafting texts you'll never send, stopped replaying old conversations looking for hidden meaning. And somewhere in that quiet accumulation of small changes, the shift completes itself. By the time the avoidant person notices anything different about you, you've usually already been different for a while. It also helps to understand what's actually happening underneath their testing behavior, because on the surface it can look almost cruel, or at least confusing. Why would someone who supposedly doesn't care randomly resurface with a casual text or an unexpected comment? The truth is, these small gestures usually aren't calculated the way they might appear. They tend to come from an anxious, almost compulsive need to check whether the emotional safety net they'd grown used to is really gone. It's less a plan and more a reflex, similar to reaching for a phone you know isn't in your pocket anymore. When you respond with warmth but not desperation, when you're pleasant but not available in the old way, it registers as a kind of confirmation they weren't fully prepared for. One thing worth being honest about is that this process isn't always comfortable for you either, even once you've made real progress. There can be moments where their sudden softness, their unexpected vulnerability, tempts you to open the door back up out of hope that things have finally changed. This is where it matters to remember the difference between someone testing the waters to soothe their own anxiety and someone actually doing the deeper work required to show up differently over time. A single nostalgic text or one moment of vulnerability doesn't undo a long pattern. Real change tends to look boring, in the best possible sense. Consistent, patient, unglamorous effort sustained over weeks and months, not a single dramatic gesture meant to pull you back in. It's also worth remembering that your detachment isn't about punishing them or teaching them a lesson, even if it ends up having that effect. It's about no longer being willing to live in a dynamic that asks you to shrink your needs down to fit inside someone else's fear. Whether or not they ever fully understand what happened, whether or not they ever come back and do the work, your own peace was never supposed to be contingent on their timeline or their capacity for growth. That's the part that tends to get lost when people focus too much on the avoidance reaction instead of their own transformation. If you've been in this kind of dynamic, it's worth asking yourself honestly where you actually stand right now. Are you still quietly waiting for some sign that things might shift? Still checking for that text? Still leaving a little emotional door cracked open just in case? Or have you genuinely moved into that place of real indifference? Not the performed kind, but the kind that comes from having actually built a life and a sense of self that doesn't hinge on their behavior anymore. There's no shame in still being somewhere in between. This kind of shift rarely happens all at once, but recognizing where you actually are rather than where you wish you were is usually the first honest step toward getting all the way there. At the end of the day, none of this is really about winning some kind of unspoken contest with an avoidant partner or ex. It was never a game to be won in the first place. It's about recognizing that your own worth was never something that needed their validation to be real, and that the healthiest, most lasting version of peace you can build is the one that exists independent of whether they ever come back, ever change, or ever fully understand what they lost. If any part of this resonated with you, go ahead and like the video, subscribe for more insights like this one, and share it with someone in your life who might need this reminder today. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and don't forget your own worth.